All systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tamboline here, a.k.a. ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of the Takedown Breakdown here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube station. Got my guy Nades back with me. Missed last week, so appreciate everybody, but we'll be back here and moving forward. So unless we get to the live final in Nashville in December, then I'll probably be on a travel day back there. So here's to hoping. But Nades, back in the booth, man. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Yeah, it feels good to be back. I've been out on work travel the last 2 weeks. Obviously, last week we didn't have a show here, but Great show as always every week. Love, huge part of our process, huge part of my process in general. So it feels good to be back here and got some interesting stuff to talk about. Obviously, big days from a lot of guys out there, and we're gonna do our best to break it down and find those puzzle pieces, right? That we misplaced because we didn't see that box in front of us, right?
Yeah, if you didn't have the Burrow Chase stuff yesterday, funny enough, Lamar ends up in the winner, so we'll talk through that strategy. It's certainly something I've used in the past, and it's a good talking point for yesterday's slate. But shout out to Sean, first in, Nate, Tweezy's here with us. Go collect new wins. Max, I got your lineup coming up later. We are going to review that one, and thanks to everybody that are setting it all up because it's all there. Also, if you guys haven't jumped over yet, I'll share it in a second, but today was the last day for the originators of those that received the email education course, but on ShipItNation.com, today was the final day of the 5-day email course. So first day, went over reviewing your lineups, and that's part of what this show is all about, what we do on here. So I'll bring up Nades, the perfect lineup, but we had a lot of this stuff covered yesterday on the show. It's just, did you get the pieces together in the right way? And so I'll start with the perfect lineup here. It's a stack. It's exactly the stack that most had, if not the $20 Millie Maker in a lot of other places, but the Burrow Chase Higgins didn't need to run it back. Couple Bears with Moore and Swift, Kraft, Slayton, Giants, and notice this one leaves $1,600 on the table. Nobody was getting to Bigsby. Very small amounts. So we'll talk through that as well. But just first thoughts on the perfect lineup yesterday when we break it down here.
Yeah, first thing you notice is, some of our tools had, they had that box there. I just didn't look at that puzzle piece box, right? Like you always talk about on some of our tools that we're going to review with the Burrow, Chase, and Higgins stuff. Obviously, if you didn't have them, it was pretty hard to take first in any contest. Basically impossible yesterday. But the Swift was, I know we were on Swift over here, DJ Moore, that combo pack there in that game environment. And then the Tucker Kraft, obviously he was 50% on for a reason. Smash spot there. Obviously, that was the pivotal game there, which we'll talk about breaking it down from an ownership standpoint. Everybody was going there, so why not just take the value piece and just avoid everything else? Always a way to get different there. And then Darius Slayton and Giants defense. I know you were on Darius break the Slayton. It happened. And then the Giants defense, we can pull up a couple pieces there because everybody else was punting off with Carolina there, which obviously they were pairing them up with Chuba Hubbard. So, in a lineup to make this make more sense in hand builds, you could have went Chuba Hubbard instead of Tank Bigsby. And then the Carolina D would have made a lot more sense. Obviously, wouldn't have scored as many points. But that could have been a little tweak there.
It wins the Millie Maker too, like just little things like that. If you even just change Bigsby to ETN and just play the more standard of what you would expect people to play and put there, still would have won the Millie. I think he only got like 12 points, but it would have been enough. I believe it was
236, I think.
7-ish. So yeah, you had room to move here. And even like, I don't know, you like moving some of the stuff around to get to different guys. Like you said, like if it's the defense with if you went Slayton up to Tyrone Tracy Jr. and then the defense up to the Broncos, you would have still probably been fine either way. So it's just one of those things. Don't worry about the Bigsby thing. It's the other stuff that should stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. But overall, pretty standard stuff here. Anytime a game goes off for 11 touchdowns, you probably need it on a main slate, and that's exactly what happened there. And the writing was on the wall on our tools over here. I know we're gonna pull up the stone here and go through it. And hey, your Baltimore Ravens there, they got the job done, but that pass defense is is not very good. And that's why obviously Joe Burrow, Higgins, Chase just absolutely nuked. And if you go to the Stone, I know I wasn't great in school, but I never really saw that F report card pop up on my any of my stuff, and that's what the Ravens have there. And obviously you saw Bengals, Chase, Higgins right there highlighted in blue. His upside plays right on the Stone. Massive total, 2.5 point spread. Nobody was going to the game. I know you talked about it. And running it back, right? Everyone's like, oh, you got to run it back. You got to run it back. Who is it? Flowers? Is it Derrick Henry? Who I know a lot of Burrow, Higgins, Chase stacks did have Henry, which kind of sunk those teams. I mean, you still did good. Henry bust off that long one in the end, right? And got to like 16 or 17 points, which was semi-salvageable. But I mean, you don't always have to force a run back, I think is a common theme that we've seen over the five weeks that we've done these shows. And especially on a team like the Ravens, where, right, maybe it's just Lamar, right? And that's what happens. So overall, not much more to say on the perfect lineup there, but did want to highlight our tools on how somebody could have got to a build similar to this.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple things with that because it's important to look at this. And obviously the perfect lineup we just went through, we saw the breakdown on it, but it's all what we can pull away from it. One of the big ones, it was talked about earlier, like Sean mentioned it here. So not only were the Giants D the opposite, the Seahawks, who I was making fun of in the Discord, calling them Kenneth Chalker and the Sea Chalks, but you could always flip the side and play the opposite, but it was double leverage because the Panthers were also very popular at 2,400 in the same spot. You also had Tracy Jr., who, if you wanted to pair it up, it was just another reason to do it, to get that much more money freed up. And we'll see that in some of the reviews later on. So just little things like that. Oracle noticed it. It was the slate breaker. I didn't know if he was going to go do that much, but that's why I like Daniel Jones. He would be a guy that brings him along. Daniel Jones only ended up having 22, 23, but on a slate when you don't see 38 out of some of these guys like Lamar, or 37 out of Lamar and Burrow, it's definitely possible. But I do want to talk about this real quick. And it's about price. If you watched the Sunday show yesterday, we talked about it. I mean, I told you guys this. I said it on the Mayo show on Friday. I said it on our show yesterday. The pricing is broken on quarterbacks. You don't, I mean, even Lamar, you end up being on the Millie Maker winner lineup. It's still only 7,500 for Lamar, 6,800 for Jaden Daniels, 6,400 for a guy like Burrow. Like, they're not going to price these quarterbacks to 8 and 9K very often. So that's going to be the thing here, that you can play these guys and get away with it. And then we talked about this yesterday. When they were similar in price, it mattered more. There was a $2,000 difference. So you were able, when you're getting a quarterback for just 6,400, you're getting a receiver with them at 6. You got to spend your money somewhere with all the value we had on the slate yesterday. So it was actually very easy to fix this. And the exact example using the Stone that we talked about on the show yesterday was how this game had an insane total, yet nobody knew how to play it. So they just were avoiding it. Those who did know how to play it were playing it in a chalky way, but it was not chalk, and you'll see it. 7.5 for Burrow came in at 6. We actually nailed Jamar Chase in the $20 Millie Maker. He literally hit 11.7 exact. So that's just random, but insane there. T. Higgins came in at 6. We had him at 4.8. Zay Flowers at 5.4. He came in a little higher than that. And then Derrick Henry, if I can find him real quick. Where's he at? He actually got steamed up. He ended up coming in way higher than expected.
26.7.
We had him at 15, but it was just a way when you looked at the Stone yesterday to see it. If they were a pass defense F, that's the report card for the Ravens. How good or bad are they against the pass? They're really good against the rush. They're failing against the pass. So that made sense. You saw where the blue was at here. You could have put it with Henry, or you could have done, which some of the other lineups did too, put it with Zay. And I talked about that at the end of the show, where you just use up all your wide receiver slots on a game. In this case, Jamar Chase, Higgins, Flowers. You had Hubbard, Swift, Tracy, more than I'm not even thinking of, just for cheap examples that you could go to. Jacobs, if you were now off that game, you maybe go to a Jacobs play there. You could get to Kraft at this point. You're already different in these 4 spots where they're all pretty much under 10%, and you'd be able to get Kraft in there with a Kyron Williams as a way to still play pieces from that Green Bay LA game. So there was a lot of ways you could use this yesterday and see it. I did just want to bring that up. So we'll talk more as we go through it there, Nades. But anything else you saw when it comes to that stuff? I think that's just one big thing. When others are struggling with it, it doesn't mean you got to avoid it just because others are struggling with it. You can still find your way onto it and get different that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece. And even if you did run it back, which typically I know you do, I do, right, when I'm building, just because I just stick to my process. And I mean, obviously you're going to have outliers like this where the run backs don't get all the way there. But I mean, if you ran it back with Flowers, you still did fine. If you ran it back with Henry, you still did fine. He still scored 17. And you had all the salary in the world with guys like Tucker Kraft, right? The Carolina defense, who obviously didn't get there, but you had ways to easily fit in Henry with the double stacks because of the quarterbacks. I mean, the quarterbacks are just underpriced. Burrow has averaged nearly 40 passing attempts in every game this season. Higgins was coming off 10 targets. Jamar Chase was coming off double-digit targets. Higgins is back. He was healthy, right? The first game back, they gave him 10 targets, right? Absolute smash spot. These guys are just strictly underpriced. I mean, Chase and Higgins are 1A, 1B in that offense that's going to throw the ball 40 plus times. So overall, I mean, everything was there. And even if you did run it back, I mean, yeah, you didn't get all the way there. Even if you went to like a Likely or a Mark Andrews, right, off of pivot at that tight end spot where everybody was going the Tucker Kraft range and things like that, you still had a very, very good day yesterday because you had the skeleton stack of Burrow with Chase and Higgins.
Yeah, and just to show it here, I'll bring up Shiptimizer because it's the same thing we did the last couple of weeks. But if you just went with what we had just talked about on the Stone, which was just going against the rush D, going against the pass D, and using those four pieces, I would have no harm. I know other people started there. I think it was very common, but you already had enough leverage at that point on your lineup that I'm just going to fill it out with the chalk and some of our values. Tracy probably goes in there at that point. Chuba Hubbard usually goes there in that point. Like you plug him in, that's fine. Okay, that sort of uses that up. Whittington with Kraft as your secondary stack in that game, that you still get to what you were looking for there. Land on the Broncos D. If you didn't use Whittington, maybe it's Tutu Atwell. And I only did that because I know more people spend the salary and I don't want to cheat it, but just showing you very basic with chalk with that other stuff. Even with Henry not even getting there, like Vinny said, he didn't even do nothing, but it doesn't really matter. That would only take it down by 5 points. That run was 51 yards, takes it down by 5. This is 208 with Whittington. It's 220. And it was 236 to win the Millie. But again, most people with some good contest selection, high dollar, smaller field, it's just showing you how you almost would have been forced into it if you just land on that and see where it's already different and just trust that you go with it. So that's another thing too. Sky City.
I brought that up. Yeah, I was going to just highlight that same comment as well because I brought this up to Tambo before the show here. However, I mean, we're all the results, right? The StatMU guys and everyone that goes out there. Okay, what are game logs with Chase and Higgins together? Typically, their pricing is much different, right? Chase isn't 8K. He's usually 9K or whatnot. And Higgins has been 7,500, 7,600, 7,800. So from a pricing aspect, I mean, they were priced much higher when Tyler Boyd was there, which is basically Yoshi Voss now. Tyler Boyd was priced in that mid 5K range. Yoshi Voss was all the way down to 4K. So from a pricing, and Burrow was over 7K, right? For the most part, when that kind of stuff was happening. So the pricing kind of inhibited that a little bit, right? Whereas we just went through the pricing. Burrow at 6,400 or 50, right? The super underpriced, right? 6,400. Chase at just 8K, right? I think that's a big reason for that. Why they haven't, because I said I probably wouldn't have got there because I know that everybody knows that, right? I see all the stats as well. It is very rare that Chase and Higgins both go off in the same game until they do, like Tambo likes to say, and they're underpriced for the role and the matchup.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I want to talk about one other thing too. I just want to see something here, but the Shiptimizer shows here too. So if I go sort by price, this was another factor as well. It's always the slate at hand. Remember, when we talk about the stuff, it's generic concepts, ideas, theories, things that we can bring into the future. But this is something to bring into the future. It's every slate is different. Here's another example. Yesterday, everyone started talking about, I thought the NFL passing game was broken. Yesterday was literally the best matchups we've had all season on paper. It could go right back next week where touchdowns are back down if the matchups aren't as strong. We had some crazy good matchups and spots yesterday. If you're seeing Trevor Lawrence come out with his bag, we told you he'd have a good game because he was in the best spot. That was what I'm talking about. It's not calling a good play. It's saying the matchups in that situation for the environments, the totals. We just had a better slate for that stuff. I'm not talking about like cornerback versus wide receiver matchup, which I usually talk differently about. I'm talking just in general. We did have some good matchups that way. So just to talk about that, that's one thing. But the bigger thing is the slate at hand. When you sort by value and you see we have a $4,300 running back, we had all cheap tight ends already that you probably didn't need Gesicki or all. I played some lineups with them. I know others did that we're going to review as well. I'm not against it. When you're playing the cheap tight end, I'd rather put it in to the Burrow stack. But just to show it out, that could have been a fourth person that you plug in. But the main thing going back to wide receivers was Chase, Nico, who it sucked. He got injured. He started off really strong and was a great leverage play yesterday because he didn't actually end up getting the ownership we thought he would. But you knew Tyreek wasn't in a great spot. You were kind of just using Marv Harrison in the run back spots. I think DK was fine. Obviously, his value was good. And if people were playing a lot of, Walker and that sort of stuff, I could see that. The Diggs revenge game, all that. But Debo, it was kind of like down here, everybody was going. So the other thing is just in the range of Higgins, who was low owned, 6% or something, you had popular Pittman, McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, even Amari Cooper. And then on top of that, you had Brian Thomas Jr., who had a great game underneath it. So don't be afraid to take out the more popular value option where people are just playing them to play them and plug in another guy that fits the stack. Obviously, if Burrow has 40 points, it could just be through Chase, but there's a chance that Higgins got in there as well. So again, it's all how many builds you have, how you build in general, but the slate at hand, there was enough value to make it work. The prices were down on Burrow and Higgins versus their usual price, and even some cases Chase, and it was in a popular area that everybody was going to someone else there. Nays, just anything else on that you want to add before you move on?
Yeah, and also, I mean, going back to the stone, right? You got to look at what how the offense operates. I mean, they're in a 75-25 pass run split, right? I mean, you got Chase Brown and you got Zach Moss both eating into each other at the position. And the team wants to throw the ball 75% of the time in a big total, in a close spread, right? So that's also part of it. How could both of them get together, get there together? Well, you want a team that's going to throw the ball 70+% of the time. You don't want a 55-45 split, something like that, where, okay, there's limited passing attempts. So that also plays into it, right? And that's why the stone is just the greatest tool in all of DFS. I mean, everything is on here. Here is the box of the puzzle that tells you how to put it together. Does it always get there? No, absolutely not. But is the writing there? And obviously, we've done this every single show so far this year and can go right back to our tools on how you can get there. Obviously, you're not going to get there every week, but everything is right here, right? If a team's going to get their double stack like that, I mean, you want them to be throwing the ball, and obviously Cincinnati does that.
Yeah. We'll move on. Everyone knows that. I think that's the good part is if you are a member, you have access to it. We try and put it up on the Sunday show once we get the certain amount of engagement on the show. But for this one, let's go to the winning $20 Millie Maker looking over here on Fantasy Labs, Dust Pop, who had 150 lineups in. And, we will get there, I guess. Let's save Dust Pop's strategy, but had a few good finishes, including the ultimate good finish, which was the number one ship it you could find, the $1 million until December 29th, when the ultimate ship is for $2 million, the 33-33. So excited for that tournament, December 29th. But just to note it here, unconventional. It was the Jamar Chase Higgins stack with Lamar, running backs against each other, Chuba and DeAndre Swift, a McLaurin one-off, Tucker Kraft, Darius Slayton, and the Denver D. So 4 spots there with lower ownership. But Nades, I'll let you break it down first, see what you see. And then the chat, you guys can fire away any questions that you have as well, and I'll try and get to those also.
Yeah, so in a game like this, I mean, many people would say, well, why not just use Burrow there? I mean, this is kind of a way that you're running it back, a Chase and Higgins. If they both get there, it's likely the game is high scoring. Who's it going to be? If it's not Henry, right, because you're burning up both the running back spots, grab the other running back on the team in Lamar, and if Lamar outscores Joe Burrow, right, because you have the salary to do so, you have a completely different stack option, right, because everybody's going to double stack, right? Usually with their quarterback. I know I've used the strategy some. Tambo, you talked about it, right? You expect the game to be high scoring when you're using 2 wide receivers from the same offense and then running back on the other side with Lamar. So I thought that was a great strategy. Obviously, when we get to his exposures, that's going to make more sense too. Punting off the running back position in the same game, I think, is an interesting strategy, and we've seen this work quite a few times actually. We all knew Chuba was in a good spot, right? Good play. DeAndre Swift, underpriced for what his talent level is. And obviously he should have had a bigger day too, right? He fell down, got vultured at the one by Roshan Johnson after a big run, and then finally got his got his other one there, but using both running backs in the game when, hey, you just expect it to kind of be a sloggy game. The game's in Chicago. It's not a great place. It's outdoors. Why can't it just get there through the ground and just use both your running back spots there that are all also leverages off the more expensive guys in that range, right? The Jordan Masons, the Kenneth Walkers that are a little bit more expensive. You still got running back ones here in the offense, pairing those two guys together. So overall, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. And then you just fill it out with the value plays to make everything else work, right? Denver defense, Tucker Kraft, which again, when we get to his exposures, are going to make more sense there too. But overall, I mean, I think it is an interesting strategy. And if you see, he won by 0.5, and the team that's a three-way chop in second place, right, was built much more conventional. So sometimes it does pay off in the grand scheme of things. I mean, $60,000 versus $1 million for building a little bit unconventional because you're playing against 170,000 other entries, right?
Yeah, certainly that's part of it, right? Just getting unique in general. But just to know, I'll go through it in a second. We'll get to that. I'm going to pull up that chopped lineup as well. It's more conventional. But another thing here, D- rush defense, C. We had them both double digits optimal on the slate. Even though there was some negative leverage, they were still very, like, for their price point. If you had to get to that by going to Lamar, certainly that would make sense on why you get there. So it's fine. Another thing that just goes with is what I always talk about, a smaller total, lower total game. Like, oh, they can't all be good plays. They're only going to put up so many points. It was a 46-point total that it got to, 10 and 36. And even with just 10 points, 18.5. Like, people really confuse real life points with fantasy points. And in a price-based game, he's 6,100. We knew he's going to get that type of work. And I think he ended up being just shy of the, this was the story. Funny enough, they pull Dalton for Bryce Young. The minute Bryce Young comes back in, there's like 9 more plays, not a single touch for Hubbard or Deontay, I believe. So just, the way it works. But same when they confuse defenses, like, oh, this defense got a touchdown, the slate's over. No, there was like 4 defenses that got a touchdown in the afternoon. And it still ended up being Denver on this one. But the Giants, if someone has them here, actually ended up getting 2 more that we talked about. So you could have still got there in different ways. And that's what I was going to say with this one, Nades, is conventional is Lamar here, it's Derrick Henry here, and it's the Giants here. And you still win the millie, right? Because you get 2 points more here, 1.9 less here, and a small point something more here. So you still end up winning the millie by a hair, but you have the game stack. You have it with Burrow. You have it with Jamar Chase, Higgins. Instead of Hubbard, you're up to the Derrick Henry play, and then you drop down to the defense for the Giants. So you can definitely still get there in this build. But I think the one thing for me that stands out is he didn't really go outside of the box besides the stack and the quarterback of the opposing team. Other than that, not complete over chalk, but definitely more popular for the price point in the range. Popular, super chalk. Like, just get it different in a few spots, but still make the lineup make sense. And certainly, I think Rin said it, who's excited. I know that EVR is back this week in the PGA streets, but said the naked quarterback option is nice on Shiptimizer. I pick my quarterbacks. They're so dangerous alone. And when it's harder to pick that side, we talked about it being harder to max that side up. But yeah, when you go into Shiptimizer, you can actually just set it up. The naked quarterback, you would just turn this off to start it. Literally says naked QB. You can't mess it up. And there's a disclaimer says set which teams can have a quarterback with no other flex positions. And then you just go down the list. Okay, Kyler fits that. Lamar fits that. Allen fits that. And then decide where you want to go. But it will only allow that. And then you can even say up here in the forced no stack percentage, the percentage of lineups that will be forced to have no stack. So if you said, I really just kind of want 10% of my lineups to have this, and really I'm only going to do it with Lamar, then you'll get 10% of your lineups with Lamar and no other Ravens in that lineup. So just tons of different ways that you can use it. Let's look at Dust Pop's setup. Actually, before we do that, Nades, let's go to the second lineup there real quick, just because people want to see probably that. This was a 3-way chop, so clearly people saw this as the more conventional. It hits all the green boxes. You don't need the running back DST, Nades, but run us through this one here. What do they got?
Yeah, obviously it's got the Burrow, Chase Higgins double stack. He ran it back with the wide receiver 1, Zay Flowers, who, I mean, he's averaging 8 targets a game in that offense, and seems to be pretty matchup proof with Lamar. I mean, when Lamar's running back there, the that one play he had, I mean, he had to run 50 yards before he threw that ball. But when you got a quarterback like that, I mean, Zay Flowers pretty much matchup proof. He's got all the time in the world to get open. So run it back there. Don't mess with the Batemans. The Andrews didn't have the money to get up to Derrick Henry because obviously he was probably going in. They were going in on the Kenneth Walker chalk, right? The chalker there. Chuba Hubbard, same thing. We already broke that down, and then just plugging in the Denver defense. But with the Walker, they ran it back with Slayton. So if Walker is having a big game on the ground, guess who? No Malik Neighbors for down the field. Who's the next guy for down the field? It's not Wan'Dale Robinson, who's the slot kind of the touch guy. It's Darius Slayton down the field, right? So he's 3,900. The little secondary stack there with Walker, and if Walker's smashing on the ground, means the Giants definitely got to be pushing the ball down the field with a guy like Slayton. So that's a good secondary stack there, a different way to do it, right? Because most people were using Walker and Robinson in that secondary stack. So getting to Slayton there I thought was good. And then just plugging in the chalk, Kraft, and Denver defense, which were too underpriced for the spot. Obviously, people are going to have their takes on that with Denver defense coming in 35% in a 180,000 field tournament. But it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I know, Kyle, you hit me up in the DM there this morning. I appreciate it. I don't have that one up, but yeah, you had it 3v3 off of this exact. That's what I was talking about. And the one thing we won't know, because somebody mentioned it, Ross did a great job here, I think, is again, like, it's just funny. People, of course, the 50-point total game went off. There's no ownership. 6%, 5, 8, 11. Like, don't act like everyone just got lucky and played the chalk and hit. Like, that's not what happened. That game, people couldn't figure it out. People were scared of the triple stack. It just, you didn't get there. People didn't build the 3 wide receivers in, like I talked about, like all that stuff. It's not like it was super common. You're just seeing it at the top of all the leaderboards because those are all the people that went to it. So obviously in a large field tournament, there's more than enough lineups that got to it. It's not my point. I'm saying, but people act like, of course the biggest total game got there. Then why didn't you play it? Why weren't you all in on it? Like, that's how I look at this stuff. And look, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys under 5, 7, 8, 9%, whatever you want to say, 5 under 10. Call it, and round Jamar Chase down at 11.7.
I also want to make one more point on that too, Tambo, where quote unquote burying, right? I use this in baseball a lot, burying your outfield spots on the same team, burying your wide receiver spots in the same stack, because guess what? Guess what the most popular build was yesterday? It was 3 running backs, right? So in order to play a 4th wide receiver, you have to use up your flex, which is going to be used up with running back on the majority of the lineups in the tournament, right? Or used up on a guy like Jaden Reed or Dontavian Wicks, right? In that massive total game that everyone was going to in the afternoon. So that's just another leverage play in itself, right there built in.
Yeah, Drea, we appreciate. I know we're going to look at some FanDuel lineup with your stuff. And Gangrene, I'll give you credit for this. I think this is important as well. It's I built well, just went to target instead. Like he said, I hit the Houston Bills game instead. Looked similar. I built well, just went to he went to that game. That's what he targeted. Just a note again, though, and we talked about it on the show yesterday. I said it's basically Patrick Mahomes 2.0. It's not victory lapping as much as just to say it. I think it was way harder to stack Josh Allen up. Like, it's just, is it going to be Samuel? Is it going to be Coleman? Mac Hollins was getting targets and people liked him. Kincaid is healthy and in the mix. They've got other guys that they actually use, and James Cook, I thought, was a pretty good play there too for leverage, and we'll get to him later. But the other thing was, look, Pasty, B, Pasty, B-. Like, to me, it wasn't a better spot. It was way harder to stack up. And the total was the exact same right here. And you kind of knew exactly what to do on one side, pick your poison on the other. It was right there. So again, doesn't make it right or wrong. It's not just results oriented. It's what looked better, what was easier. The other thing, Nades, just back to this one too. If you're going to play Kenneth Walker, we talk about this all the time. And in a secondary stack, how do we slash that ownership? Get the product ownership down is throwing a 4.6% piece, goes against the 3 running back day that a lot we're going with, and really slashes into that ownership of 25.6. So this secondary stack, even if you thought, the other stuff was going to be a bit more popular with Chuba, with Denver, with Kraft, this still was a way to cut into it to get another leverage piece into your lineup. It wasn't Tracy who was more popular. It was Slayton, even though both had pretty good days for their price point. One was Darius break the slate, and one was Tracy, a good value play. So there's that. And then the last thing I'll say is we also don't know if they late swapped to this, because to Russ's point where I originally started with, Ross's point, it's always here. We appreciate you, Ross, said, I swapped onto this after I had that. That's where I had the little rant, because that's the facts. that was a nuke. You knew when you had Burrow, Chase, Higgins to start things off, and even if you had the Zay version especially, but even the Henry was fine with 16, you're like, all right, I got what you had the low ownership guys that broke the slate already or were in pretty good shape. You never know if it actually broke the slate till the afternoon happens, but my take is like, this was the right move for you to move this stuff, like Bo Melton and Theo Johnson, and we'll get to that, the first lineup we review here in a second, but I think you did the right thing, and we'll never know if these guys did either. But once you have that stuff go off at such low ownership, you can go to Kraft and Denver D and feel good about it if that's how you do your swaps. Nades, I'll kick it to you because you play less lineups, but you play sort of condensed process and everything that we talk about here. How do you handle your late swap, or do you have a process in relation to late swap? Because we get questions every week. I get DMs about it, all this stuff, where I know people have no process to it. And so I'm trying to help them learn and understand what that looks like. But what do you do?
Yeah, so first off, obviously you start looking, right, when pretty much when red zone kind of hits that witching hour, right? Obviously more scoring can happen, but that's kind of my tea, right? When witching hour hits on red zone to, hey, look at my teams, look where they're sitting, kind of look what I got. And obviously you know, right, what kind of the quote unquote nuts from the morning is, right? When you're sitting on a Burrow, Chase, Higgins, right, they're all low ownership. I'm much more likely to eat higher chalk and just get better plays that are going to increase the floor of that lineup to hold as much cash as possible and potentially even shoot up further because you know you're already so much different than the rest of the field. However, on the flip side, when I know I have a team that, okay, I didn't have any Burrow yesterday, I didn't have any Chase yesterday, I didn't have none of that stuff yesterday. So I was looking at teams, okay, how can I get to the min cash line to reap some of my profits or my entry fees back? Well, it's not going to be playing the Tucker Kraft. It's not going to be playing the chalky plays that 35-40% of the field are on, because guess what? They also have that paired up with a Burrow. They have it paired up. So they already have me beat in overall lineup score already. I'm going to swap to higher upside, lower ownership plays that are still good plays. Do they get there? You don't know, right? But that's kind of the way to approach it. So when you have the lower owned stuff that are there, I look for more safety in my swaps versus on the flip side, if I'm kind of behind the eight ball, I'm looking for higher upside to get off that ownership. So that's kind of the first play. And then obviously I look at our tools and projections and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the first point on where I look. And I think it is definitely important to look at.
Yeah, I love that call, and I think the breakdown is good because I think more people play less lineups, but it really doesn't matter. So I do want to add this on as just my extra piece. Like you won't see it probably on my phone with the focus, but first of all, you have to know to late swap. You talk about witching hour is your sort of bell that goes off. I have it in my phone. It's now it's second nature, but I still have it there because that reminder is important to make sure I'm looking at it. It can be the difference between a profitable week. It can be the difference between losing a bunch of money, making a bunch of money. And I'll talk about that in a second. I've certainly made 6-figure late swap mistake in the wrong direction, which hurt me for quite a while, but bounced back well last year from it. But just to note that if you have a process, at least you can stick to it. What ends up happening is should I late swap? Should I late swap? You have to know why and how. And you just hit on a bunch of key points, but just to add on, again, if you always do it, then do it. If you always do it and the way you do it is via the projections and you say, look, I already hit on my low owned stuff, I'm going to move all these other pieces to the 10-point better projection lineup. I like that. I'm good with that. I would do that if that's what you always do. But you also have to remember what the mistake can happen. So I've done this before. My process is the latter of what I just talked about, where I switched to the much better projection, much better spot based on injuries and whatnot. And the 2v2 swap cost me $100,000. I ended up making like $600 instead of $100,000 for third place. It was in a Millie Maker tournament. Actually, it was $1 million, $250, $100. It was one on FanDuel, the big, it's called like the FanDuel online final that they charge $250 for each year. That's the one. And I made this swap mistake and it's fine because it hurt at the time. But what I learned from it was I still stuck to my process and I haven't actually ever done it yet where it's made me $100K. But it didn't kill me. I learned from it. I said, look, I stick with my process. And last year I won 100K 3 times since. I mean, that's well since then. So it's like I've won tons of big prizes since. It's not going to be the end of the world if you make the mistake, but you should stick to what you do. But you do have to know that FOMO side of it. Like I said, where it's like, if you make the swap, you can't sit there and be mad if that's your process. That's why you should have one. And then it doesn't work out or it actually hurts you to the tune of 6 figures. You can't let that be like, oh, I'm an idiot, I shouldn't have done it. You did it because it's your process. or you didn't do it because you don't have a process. So make sure you've got a plan in mind. Obviously, we can elaborate on that further in future, but I just think it's important to know that you should have a reasoning behind why you're doing what you're doing. And if it's part of something you always do, then stick to it. If it's not something you usually do, then I wouldn't do it just to do it. And that's kind of a topic we could spend more time on another day. Let's see. We got lineups to review, but real quick, I do want to pull up the winner dust pop here just to see exposures. This is pretty crazy, actually. Played 100% Lamar Jackson on 150 lineups at 149 unique, used 42 players total, played 100% DeAndre Swift on this slate. Really spread it out and capped at wide receiver, played 100% Tucker Kraft, and played 100% Denver D. So Nades, talk to me about this because I think there's certainly a lesson here, but just your thoughts on how he played it.
Yeah, I mean, he knew going in, okay, if Lamar gets there, he's got outs, right? Or actually really all the guys that he kind of locked, right? He knew Denver D was going to be chalky. He probably didn't think 35% in this contest, but he didn't care what it was because he just locked him in, right? He took the free square. I know some people did that, and there's probably a lot of sharp players in this contest or in a lot of contests that just say, okay, Denver D, I'm either going to fade him or I'm going all in. I'm not going to match the field or things like that. Obviously, that's a whole different conversation, but locked him in there. He liked the massive total game there. Didn't really know who to stack him with. So, hey, I'm just going to go with Lamar. And if I get stacks from the Baltimore side, okay, but I'm also probably have a setting in my optimizer that says I want some game stacks. So he's naturally going to get pieces from the Bengals side in that with a quarterback that has upside on his own. So I like that. The Tucker Kraft, same thing. So kind of locking the two value plays and then locking your two kind of flag plant plays. I think is an interesting standpoint here because obviously he had a flag plant on Lamar and Swift, and then the two value plays in Tucker Kraft and Denver D, who he knew, right, the field was at 31% and 35% ownership. He knew he was going to be way over the field in that. He just locked those two squares in because he already knew he had, right, the field came in at 6% on Lamar, 18% on Swift, which he probably thought was even going to be less than that. So he knew those were his two flag plants, take the value, and then just let his settings and his other optimizer in his pool kind of filter in around those guys. So obviously it's a pretty bold strategy, but when it pays off to the extent of over $1 million, right? $1 million in like little 1.03 or whatever, like 1,030,000 or something like that. So overall, I mean, it's a tighter way to play. He could have had a horrible day, but he knew that going in, right? He's playing against 191,000 entries.
Yeah, and one thing to note too is he played more of like I'm just playing my 42 guys. I'm taking my stands at certain positions, and I'm looking for whatever I get. Because I will note, like there was Lamar lineups with nobody else from the Ravens and nobody from the Bengals. There was Lamar with just Chase. There was Lamar with Derrick Henry, which I didn't like, but I'll talk more on that later. But just to note, like there's, this type of lineup here: Lamar, Swift, Tracy, Diggs, Ayuk, Thomas, Kraft. These are all just good plays. Leverage plays, like if you weren't playing the, look at the ownership, 15% versus 25 on Metcalf versus Walker for $200 more, 6% on Ayuk versus who, I said that yesterday. So he's got to be a great play regardless of whatever result happens. He wasn't needed on the main or anything, but he's got to be a great play because everyone loves Mason and everyone loves Debo. So he's kind of squeezed in the middle there a little bit, or less than both actually, but way less ownership. Diggs, if you weren't getting to Collins or somebody on that team. Tracy, fine. DeAndre Swift, fine. But just little notes like that. He only had a cap. He only had at most 20% any wide receiver. Because if you go to his wide receiver exposure, you can see here.
Yeah, he had a cap of 20% on anybody else besides those four guys he locked.
And he only had, I say only, but he had 15% Jamar, little bit of leverage, 13-ish% T. Higgins, little bit of leverage. So the fact that not only did, those two end up together, but on the perfect lineup that he, for this tournament, the one that ended up winning, not perfect overall, but the winning lineup with Lamar like that, that's just the way it works out. But definitely just played a pool of good plays and said, like, let's see if I can get the best projection put together. And it didn't look like a lot of, extra stacking or anything like that. Obviously, it worked out on the main lineup with the leaderboard here, but no pass catcher. The bringbacks are there. I don't know why it says it doesn't, because he does have somebody from the other side. Doesn't have the running back with the D, doesn't have Max running back for game. So unconventional, but got there nonetheless. So I think that's a good one to check out. Let's look. Yeah, that's just
Hey, go collect. So I want to bring this up because I mean, the Denver D was in a good spot. That's why they came in at 35%. I mean, Denver just came off a massive win. They're playing at home. They got a good defense in general. I mean, they have one of the best secondaries in the league with Surtain and that back there. And you got Gardner Minshew with no Devontae Adams. I mean, it's just no overall. I mean, he's got Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, who's obviously good, but still Gardner Minshew, who's going to still chuck the ball. No Zamir White, right? So overall, I mean, the spot was good, and he knew he was chalky and just go in with it, and the price was good, right? I mean, 2,900 for a defense at home in a game that they're projected to win, and Gardner Minshew is projected to have to throw the ball a lot, where there's going to be opportunities for interceptions.
Yeah, and this is the part of it too that goes like literally locking Kraft, locking Broncos, locking Lamar. That's the whole point of what Nate's talked about earlier, and just the standard of taking a shot. Like if you're playing to win, if those pieces of your core get there, you're going to have so many pieces strewn around them that you are very likely to hit the top or near the top with outs because you've got those pieces that are already filled in for you. So while very true with this statement, that's why we usually cap it 20%, something like that. He did that at wide receiver. He did it a little bit at running back outside of Swift, right? And let everything else mix in and blend in, including non-3 running back lineups. So yeah, just a much crazier strategy, but it's a risk reward. When people ask what size should my player pool, that's a prime example. We can see a 96-person player pool or a 105-person player pool get to the top. We can see a 42-person player pool with 3 or 4 locks in it get to the top. So little things like that we'll find out as we go along. Let's look at some of these lineups we got to review here. We got plenty of time, Nades, to go through this. And the first one, Royal Chief wanted to get in. Said if you could review this was my highest scored lineup. Used the stack rankings, DVP rankings, used it in the smaller dollar mini first down contest. Thanks, as always. I got a little bit of a challenge with this lineup, so maybe I'll run through it first and then just get your take. But it's a Lamar, Henry, Bateman, run it back with Yoshi Voss. It's got a secondary stack with Connor and Kittle. It's got another secondary stack with Reed and Atwell and Broncos D. So from a setup perspective on this lineup, it's what we talk about all the time. It's a 3-1, a 1-1-1-1, or 2 secondary stacks, and then it fills out with the defense. That to me is fine. I think first off, we talked about this yesterday on the show. Not sure if it was watched by Royals Chief here, but just to note, did not like this to start the day already. They literally eat into each other. So could it have got there? Yes, but it's just so unlikely that they're both going to have the ceiling day that you need. So I didn't really love that stack at all. I also think this lineup is extremely over leveraged. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. And that's not even a big deal. Like you can play 6 guys under 10%, but when you're adding in Yoshi Voss at 1%, Bateman at 0.6%, Connor, who it's fine. I get it. Flipping that game, the opposite side of Mason, but there was like 12 other running backs I probably had ahead of Connor on yesterday's slate. The rest probably all fine. Like I get it. At least you played those places. You played the proper games. Green Bay, LA. You played San Francisco, Arizona. I don't think you can completely critique it, but I do think that was the point. When you went super expensive like this up top, it forced you into the Batemans, Yoshi Voss, all these other spots within your lineup. I guess I could be a little bit less hard on the lineup, but overall, I just think it's a little bit much, and I think it's the starting point that hurt you in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great call out too. And how can you make that decision for yourself as well, besides listening to the show? Well, going to the Stone and looking at, okay, the Ravens, they pass 54% of the time. They run 46% of the time. Well, Lamar Jackson's averaging 12 rushes a game, whereas Derrick Henry's only averaging 18 rushes a game. So right there, they show it's negative leverage plus the prices. I mean, Derrick Henry's 7,800 and Lamar Jackson is 7,500. When you pair those two guys together, which are pulling against, right? If you expect Lamar to have a massive game, okay, well, it's likely Henry's not going to hit his ceiling at that price. Then it forces you in to use the Batemans and the Yoshi Vosses, who are wide receivers 3 and 4 on the respective team. If you go down to one of the cheaper running backs in a good spot, the Chuba Hubbards, or I mean, the list goes on and on. Then you can get up to a Chase, you can get up to a Higgins, you can get up to a Flowers in the same game where it still makes sense for your overall roster that you're going in on with much better potential right, for the ceiling. And that's not results oriented. That's just overall using the tools in a different way. Even if Chase didn't get there, Higgins didn't get there, Flowers didn't get there, it's still just using the tools differently, and just giving yourself better outs to the top without having to find 8 diamonds in the rough at sub 10% that, okay, I'm super leveraged, and if these guys all go crazy, I'm going to win $1 million, right? Or whatever first place is, and that's part of the thread that Tambo just put out in the emails, right? You don't have to be over leveraged. We just reviewed a bunch of lineups that won tons of money outside of the other contests that we just reviewed, that had all chalk besides 3 or 4 positions, right? They had the Burrow double stack that was sub 10% owned, and then they ate chalk everywhere else.
Yeah, like let your non-chalk, like if you're going way off the board, but like 6% Lamar, 8% McLaurin, 8% Higgins, 5%, and an 11% Jamar Chase. Like you already have good players that you just don't need to do that. Again, I don't want to go too hard on it, but I will just say, like, I think it was the starting point bottled you up a little bit. Henry dropping down to Tracy allows you to get Yoshi Voss up to like a Higgins, or you can make a few more changes, like, Kittle becomes Kraft with that well. And then you're able to get up to making those 2 moves where you're able to get up to Chase. And that's fine. Like I think leaving Bateman in with it would have been fine. And then just moving up Yoshi Voss. But when you need both these guys to hit, you're already asking for a lot. And then you're you're just flipping a lot of situational stuff that I just don't think you need to do that. But I will say, love the build structure, right? The 3-1 with the couple of secondary stacks in the defense. I'm good with that. You built yourself a 4-game parlay. Love that. And then also, I think sticking to the good games. Like you went Baltimore, Cincy, Green Bay, Rams, Arizona, San Francisco, and the best D spot on the slate, hence the ownership. So good with all that. Just little things like that. You bottlenecked yourself a little bit, even outside of the results. I said this yesterday, well before the slate started. It's not a results-based thing. It was you really hurt yourself here, and it bled into the rest of the lineup. So I think that's the key takeaway for that one. Let's go on to this next one. I wanted to bring up this one. First of all, M. Manning's always in the chat. Shout out to Max right here. Said, love this show earlier. Appreciate that. Family man, got the family pick up there. So I appreciate that too. But just looking at the lineup, 30th place for 3,500. I don't know if Max is still in here, but if you are, just curious, what tournament was it? The Wildcat or what was it in? But just to note, he did go with the Burrow stack with all juniors. So all ended up actually getting to double-digit ownership in some of this stuff. And I'm not even against it. Like I get that. That does make it a little bit tougher. But at the same time, at least it's to round out a stack and to make other stuff fit. This one kind of makes sense on paper. Higgins for the 2K savings, which I talked about yesterday. If you weren't getting to Chase, still had a pretty good game. That allowed you, if you wanted to get up to a Derrick Henry, you could. So he got that type of stack. Had a couple Green Bay guys in here with Jacobs and Reed. Brian Thomas Jr. with Pittman as a secondary stack. And then I like the Arizona D because, and it was the game changer. Is that the, what one is the
1,500. Yeah, that's 1,500.
Single entry?
1,500, 100K to first. It's 282, so I think it's a single entry, yeah.
But yeah, just a note, really good lineup setup overall. Didn't completely pan out. I think it's good for that style of tournament too, where you can get away with a little bit more. It's just unfortunate you didn't have Chase in there instead of all of that stuff. But just to note, a couple things. One, I was going to say first, I like the D because I've been talking about this lately. It didn't work out. It's just to talk about, I call it the free square. It's not about the result. And so people have probably already heard this rant. I'll wrap it up, make it quicker. But if you're not playing Mason and you're not playing Debo, I just don't have a problem with landing on that because it's fine. Like to me, it's fine. You're already saying I'm not seeing them doing the work. Maybe it's because they fumble or make mistakes or the team screws up or whatever else it might be. And in the end, the 49ers did lose that game. So it was an interesting spot he went to there. But our guy Go Collect, too sharp. He's already on it. The flex, like Reed should have been in the flex. Pittman should have been in the wide receiver. That would allow you opportunity to make late swaps later on with Jacobs and Reed for sure, both being able to be plays that you could move around, and the Arizona Cardinals D. So just to note it, I mean, you could have had that as something else you thought about, but it looks like you were leaving it either way. Nades, I'll let you take a look at this one. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, that was the first thing, right? Obviously, Pittman and swapping Reed, because that would have allowed you more flexibility. You could have got to some running backs there when you knew Derrick Henry in this contest kind of capped your ceiling, right? Obviously, he didn't have a terrible game, but it kind of capped your ceiling. And in a contest that's a 282 entrance person, it's a little bit easier to kind of look at the leaderboard and kind of put the pieces together if you do that kind of in-depth analysis. I mean, you're not going to go through 6,000 entries above you in a Millie Maker, but in a 282 person contest that you're paying $1,500 to be in, you can pull the lineups out of there, export the CSV, whatever, and kind of make and look at different tweaks. And obviously, Max, you're a great guy, and we appreciate you tuning in here and submitting this great finish there. But I'm sure you're very serious about a sport like NFL DFS to be able to make that. So that's one thing I wanted to call out there. I don't have a problem with the all junior, the Higgins Burrow. I mean, like I said, Higgins came off 10 targets last week. All was in a great matchup, great spot. They like him there, even with Gesicki back. He's still getting snaps. He's still getting routes. So I don't mind that. Derrick Henry was in a good spot. It's a great run back, right? How do you attack Cincinnati? Was through the ground, right? Derrick Henry could have had a massive day, right? Obviously, it was Lamar. So I don't have a problem with that. The Jacobson Reed thing, I don't mind that. I did use the combo pack a lot, but I was doing it more with a cheaper receiver like a Wicks or a Bo Melton or a Tucker Kraft with Jacobs, because if Jacobs and Reed are both getting there, it's very hard to imagine a Ram on the other piece at those prices weren't also getting there. So I don't know if I would have did that. Having Reed in the flex would have allowed you to get to a different play in that regard. But overall, great build. I don't mind the combo pack of that. I would have just did it with two cheaper guys at lower ownership. I mean, you knew Jaden Reed was going to be approaching 50% in this contest. So using him and Jacobs, it would have been hard to see somebody else having a similar build not have one of those Rams that would have got there. That's the only other call out.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point that I'll finish on. Then we'll go to the next lineup. Shout out to Max. He was in the chat. Said, knew that was coming with the skeleton there for being dead. Like, this is the setup. But Go Collect mentioned it. All was cheap enough. So I really like the lineup overall, especially for the tournament that he was in. Like, this makes perfect sense. I think you nailed it, though, Nades. The late swap thing is not just a call out on the obvious that you got it in the wrong area. When you're in the tournament size that's that small, that it's a single, like that's going to be a key focus. I don't care if you're playing 10 grand plus yesterday, you're going to go to your $1,500 single entry at some point when you have that kind of start. And it's not about should you have swapped. I think you were fine. You were already in a good place with a good lineup. Like, I'm fine with you even leaving it. It's more of making sure you're setting yourself up for that in the future, because that is most certainly a tournament not only you're going to go and check, but where you're going to maybe be able to make an impact based on how small the field size. And again, that matters when you're building, which is the all call out. Like, it's fine for that size tournament. You still have the passing game. It freed you up more money to get to some even better plays in the lineup that just didn't fully perform. You had a lot of really mid-tier performances. Henry, Jacobs, Reed, Pittman, all those guys could have, had more in their tank. But just to note, I like it for setting it up that way, but certainly think you should keep that in mind for future. Let's go to this next one. Zach Tyler. He says, my best lineup yesterday, $20, 3 entry max, early only. So early only, keep in mind, Nades. That's one thing I want to look at here. Certainly fun playing some of those slates too, especially on a slate like yesterday. Just a keynote on that, not just the early only angle. First of all, on early only, it's nice because there was a lot of action in the afternoon yesterday that you could just avoid altogether. Second of all, even for the main slate, just a key takeaway is if everybody's focusing, like there was people saying, I got my whole cash lineup in the afternoon. Anytime you have a slate like that, it's always a good idea. And this is part of reflecting back and just remembering little tidbits and things as you go along. It's not a bad idea to get after some of that stuff in the morning because it doubles down, right? Even if it's just a part of your portfolio, obviously Higgins would have fit into that, Burrow, Higgins, Chase, those guys would have fit into that. But you're able to set yourself up for those late swaps that we just talked about and making those people in the afternoon real squirmish when they're like, oh man, I missed out on what looks like the nuts already. They need Jordan Love and those boys to have huge games now, and they're kind of just sitting ducks while you're sitting there pretty, just having the pieces that complement that or go with it. So I think that's another takeaway there, Nades. Anything to add on early only? If not, take us into this lineup here, and what do you see?
Yeah, so I think even if I'm building a lineup that has all early only plays, I'm still putting it in the main. But if you're building for the main and you realize, okay, after you get your lineup, you like where it is and you notice, okay, it's got all afternoon players or all early players, go put that same exact build into the early only contest or the afternoon only contest. So then it's still in 2 spots at once, right? I think just adding on to what Tambo was saying there, just because, I mean, it gives you different areas and different outs for more profit is the only additional add there. But I mean, the Burrow Chase stack, fine. The Mark Andrews pulled that from Tambo. I know Tambo talked about him quite a bit on the show at 4K, right? He had all the opportunity, right? He had like 4 for 55 or something. could have had a touchdown. I mean, Kolar was in there with the touchdowns. I mean, literally everybody.
Andrews dropped out like the 1 or 2 on that, and then Kolar.
Literally everybody in this game scored a touchdown besides Mark Andrews. So pretty much, I don't mind that. I like that. The Downs and Thomas secondary stack I really like. Right, especially with Joe Flacco in that offense, it just automatically. I mean, you take your franchise quarterback out, and naturally the offense becomes better for DFS, which is kind of crazy to say, right? Because he's just going to chuck the ball, right? So Downs, that obviously Downs had a connection with him when he came in last week. So I like that. Brian Thomas is a certified stud there. The Texans D, I mean, I think it's interesting, but I just don't know if I would have ended up on something. And it's not results oriented. When you got, I mean, maybe if you're because you're not playing Josh Allen, you're not playing Cook, you're not playing that. But I just don't know if the opportunities were going to be there. Buffalo, especially if they're playing with the lead, is very easy and very willing to kind of sit on the ball and run. So from an opportunity standpoint, I don't know if I fall on that, but that's a little minor thing there. And I mean, outside of that, I think it's a good build. It's got the Hubbard and the Swift combo that we've seen win all the big contests on the slate. So overall, great build. But the only additional thing I would add it to the main or vice versa. If you're building a main lineup, add it to the early only or afternoon only if you realize all your plays are from that time slot.
Yeah, and one other thing, he said this, and it's not results oriented. It's going to seem this way because it's with Higgins. He literally said, he said, I don't know if Cooper over Higgins was the wrong play or not. It would have let me finish in first, though, with Higgins. I think 3 notes that I would take away is, one, I like to double stack Joe Burrow. I don't care that it's early only or a smaller slate. There's still 6 games. I think for him to have this type of performance, somebody else is coming with him. And so I would have really liked that. 2, I talked about this plenty yesterday. I rarely ever see Amari Cooper break a slate unless it's attached to his quarterback. And again, I believed in Watson. I know others did as well. We played him yesterday. So it's not saying like I knew that. I'm saying, but I would want to attach Cooper more to Watson for the same reason I want to attach Chase to Joe Burrow. If Chase has a huge game like this, Burrow smashed, which is the case. So Chase is on the case. Some might be watching Paw Patrol out there. We had that in the Discord yesterday. A lot of people bringing that one up, but Chase was definitely on the case. And if you want to go here and put Higgins, the other thing is the leverage. Like you have 50% almost, 35, 20, another chalk piece. Like Cooper was still chalk, 22, 36, one guy at 5% and a defense at lower ownership. I like the Houston D. You're saying I'm not touching that game, so why not just play the D at home against Allen, who can make mistakes? But I definitely would have liked Higgins in there more, and I know it would have got you the ship, but I think from double stacking Burrow, not stacking Cooper, and the leverage that you were missing in this lineup, I would definitely recommend you double stack Burrow in that. It just happened to be that it's results oriented because Chase would have had a better game and won it for you.
Yeah, I think an additional add is how do you decide whether you're going to single or double stack a quarterback? And I think it goes back to the rushing upside piece. Does Burrow have upside? Yeah. From a rushing standpoint? Yeah, maybe if he's getting pressure on him and he's got to scramble for 3 yards, but he's not going to have design runs. He's not going to be a Jaden Daniels, a Lamar, a Josh Allen that have design runs and going to scramble and get you 40 yards on the ground that you're hoping that he could get you for the ceiling performance. And you already knew, I mean, I was on Watson. I was on Cooper stacks. You already knew that game was going to get ownership, especially in the early only time slot. So you're grabbing a chalky piece. Cooper's not going to go out there and get you 10 for 120 and no touchdown, right? He's pretty touchdown dependent. If he has a big game, like you said, Deshaun Watson's likely to have a big game at his price point. So that's a great point you did. But how do you get to a decision point of, am I going to be able to single stack or double stack this quarterback? It goes back to the rushing upside piece for me. A pocket passer that's going to throw the ball 40 plus times a game. You're likely want to double stack that kind of quarterback with either a running back, a tight end, another wide receiver. It doesn't matter who you use because it just you know the opportunities are going to be there for those other guys to be brought along with him.
Yeah, and I like this too from a Illini fan like Cooper. Again, I don't care about him being at home. That's possibly a thing, but sure, going to the DJ Moore revenge game. Not against what you're saying here. I'm just saying when we're talking about it like we are right now, well, it seems results oriented because Higgins did have the better game and he literally said would have won him the tournament. It's actually not why we're talking about it. We're talking about for many other reasons. Like we said, double stacking Burrow, no rushing, making sure that Cooper would probably be with Watson. It's more likely he has that bigger game. It's not just saying it's easy to say after who you should plug in. We're saying why Higgins could have made a lot more sense. And I talked about this earlier in this very show. don't fall into the trap of like, okay, he would have had Deontay Johnson here. He would have had McLaurin here. He would have had Cooper here. He could have went to all these guys, and they're just safe one-offs, but you don't have any leverage in your lineup. You have Joe Burrow. You have, this is another note too. I'll go to it in a second, but Joe Burrow, Mark Andrews, and the Texans D. You really don't have much leverage. And then don't forget, as much as Chase was only 11% on the main slate, in early only when people got to spend that he's going to get even more popular in that. So, I mean, you already knew you didn't have much leverage in this lineup, and it ended up costing you. So again, great build, nothing against it. Cooper could have obviously had 30 points yesterday. I get it. We're just saying the why, and then hopefully you can put that together and think about it for next time. So congrats. Nice finish still. Great build. Just little things that we're trying to find when we're going through these review shows. And the last one, our girl Drea here, we're going to bring this up. She plays on FanDuel, and she had Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Zay. She said earlier she used my thought process of you may as well just fill out all those spots. She also said late swap to Harris when she saw both running backs were out, so she was able to get the pip. They do include the Sunday game, so she did the running back defense secondary stack. She used Hubbard, who her and I both always love. She's always tagging me, wondering we needed him to get the bonus. 97 yards, and FanDuel has the bonus now. That would have been nice. And then Theo Johnson and Josh Jacobs as a way to get a piece of that game. Johnson as opposed to Tracy or Slayton or anything like that if she didn't have room for it. So, Nades, I'll let you talk about this one quick. I know we don't play a ton on FanDuel, but just we should spend some time on it. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, overall, I think it's a good build because, especially on FanDuel, right, more touchdown dependent. Obviously, there's still the bonuses and things like that, but half-point PPR. It pays off more to go in, I think, on burying all your wide receiver spots, because if you expect Burrow to get there, right, you're expecting him to be throwing touchdowns. Who's his two best targets? It's Chase and Higgins. Zay Flowers is the comebacker on the other side, the red zone target, right? The touchdowns there. So I really like that a lot because you're less likely to have a guy go 12 for 87 yards and get a bunch of points because he's only getting 6 points for those 12 catches instead of 12. So that's Tambo's strategy even plays more dividends, I think, on a FanDuel more touchdown dependent site. So I really like that. I don't know who she swapped off of for Najee, but Najee, I mean, this guy's dust, but he was in one of the best running back spots of the entire slate yesterday. So I do like that play a lot. Correlated with the Steelers defense at home against Dak on the road, right? So I really like that play, and then just filling it in with guys that can score touchdowns. Josh Jacobs, right? Theo Johnson, a red zone guy when they're down weapons there. So overall, it's a great build. Probably didn't get all the way to the top, but I still think from a results standpoint, or a process standpoint, I think you were in a great process mindset here. When you're late swapping, you still want to late swap onto a guy or a player that is in a good spot and has potential to have a ceiling, right? And Najee did. Right. It was a great spot. It was, I mean, Cowboys are one of the best teams to target running backs against. And I know I was on him heavy for Showdown last night. And so overall, I mean, great build.
Yeah. Go back. It was the early version. So I don't have the finished version up, but the Rushdie F. So, you talk about that spot and everything that was there, going back to the stone and just being able to use our stuff to talk through it. I love that. I think on FanDuel, it made a ton of sense. Also, Harris was super cheap over there. So when you get those injuries and stuff that add up, I like pairing it with the D. Going against Dak on the road, all that stuff. You weren't playing the passing game with Green Bay. The rest just kind of fills itself out. We knew Hubbard's in a good spot. We saw, I think it was Chicago. Go back to the stone again, too. Chicago was, a C? So, that was definitely a fine spot. I'm good there. I think overall the build, very solid. Made a ton of sense, especially site-dependent for what the site that you were on. And you got a lot. You had 37, 39. Could have been more. Could have been, the bonus would have been almost 20-ish because you get 3 more is 18.5. A little bit more at the yards. Would have been pushing 19. So, no fumble, maybe. I mean, there's opportunity there. 24, 18.5 could have been even more for Zay. And then I don't mind the Theo Johnson only because you got to use a onesie up. You got to use up a onesie position, the spot. And if you're not playing Tracy, which isn't really as good on FanDuel, wasn't as cheap or whatever. And then also you're not going to Slayton. You want to get a piece of that Green Bay LA game. I'm fine with the way you did it with Jacobs, using the flex, all that. I think Harris, I don't know where your late swap came in because it would have been later in the day and maybe you were just fine with leaving it, but would have been the other way around again, same thing, just because that night you could have swapped to something else. If everything else, in the afternoon busted, you could have went from Najee Steelers to something else with Dallas and somebody there. But I think that's just another little note, but overall, great build. So love to see that. Obviously, if you guys have more questions, you want to bring your lineups in, we'll be back again next week. But I like Zach's call out there. Yeah, just, build what you're comfortable with. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and I know, Tambo, we talk about this all the time in the Discord. We talk about it on the shows we're on. You don't have to play the main slate. You don't have to play that. If you're great at Showdown, right, you do better at Showdown. You look at your ROI tracker or whatever you use to track your stuff. If you're playing serious to have this, whether it's a pastime, whether you're full-time, whatever, you stick to your comfort zone or you stick to what you're good at, right? I mean, Tambo sticks to the sports that he knows, right? Will he dabble in NHL and some of these other stuff? Yeah, absolutely, he will. But if you're overwhelmed with main slate, that's fine. Build for early only, build for afternoon only. If you're better and more profitable at Showdown, go higher, go more into the Showdown streets. You don't have to play every slate, every sport, everything like that. Stick to what you're good at, stick to what you know, and refine the process. And then if you want to add on a main slate or something like that, once you kind of got to a point where you're comfortable and you're in a good spot, then you can do that. But I didn't want to bring that up because that's important. Everybody thinks they need to play everything, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, and all we were saying, Dre, with your comment there was that there's no way that you couldn't have put Harris in the flex because Jacobs game even if you swapped it just before the afternoon game, that's how you had Jacobs and Harris in there. Harris was the very last game of the day. So unless you had a different person there, you still had it in the wrong place. You still would want to have Harris in the flex for the most flexibility going into that night game. Because, for example, if you're way behind on that slate and you knew Harris was as owned as Harris was going to be, you could have swapped to somebody else in that game, like Tolbert, for example. And again, results oriented, but the reason you would have been swapping is because you knew Harris would have been the very popular piece in that last game. And if you wanted to give yourself a leg up or you need to do something there would have been a swap opportunity. If you always want to keep, there's a new Tamboism, get a swap opportunity, keep those swap opportunities in mind. That's what you want to make sure of. So I think that's going to do it for this one, Nades. Another fun show, going back through it all. This is important. One thing I will show quick, just if you guys aren't on it yet there, let me go to SHIPIT Nation. I'll pull it up. This is what I was talking about earlier. If you want that email education course that spends a lot of time talking about this stuff, and day one, lesson one, you'll get it within the next 15, 20 minutes after you sign up, does talk about this review show and just reviewing your process in general, then you would just go here, go to shipitnation.com, put in your email. It's completely free to sign up. Click send me lesson one, and you'll be well on your way. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. If you want to check out SHIPIT Nation, we'll have all our coverage going to be on live in about 1 hour with Hoop, just under an hour now. Hoop, Title, and myself breaking down everything for the Monday Night Football slate. Hit that like button on the way out. Make sure you subscribe. For Nades, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it!